Did you ever think you would make it? I feel I'm so close I could taste sweet victory. I know this life meant for me.
Adam, what's your point? The future looks bright.
My handshake is better than anything I ever signed. Right here.
You are a one-of-one?
My son's right about
I don't think I've ever said this before.
Rupert Lowe, it's great to have you on the podcast.
I'm honored to be on your show, Patrick.
The honor is truly mine. You know, when I saw the disturbing report that you wrote that went viral all over X, I don't know how many views it got, hundreds of millions of views. And then I had to go through this report and read it and read the stories of Chloe and Sebastian and others and the solutions and the stats, and then hear how many people on the market reacted to it negatively, calling it baloney, bogus, which we'll get into that as well. I love the fact that you put that together because not a lot of people want to risk doing that. So I applaud you for doing that. And so I definitely want to cover this, the inquiry that we have here. But before doing so, today, if I'm not mistaken, as a member of the parliament yourself in Britain, today is the 10-year anniversary of the Brexit referendum that happened 10 years ago. And UK voted 51-9 to 48-1. And since then, you've had 7 different prime ministers in 10 years. Keir Starmer just resigned a couple of days ago. I think when you and I were speaking on Sunday, the next day he resigns. So why do you think, one, he resigned, and why has UK had 7 different prime ministers the last 10 years?
Well, as I think we discussed briefly when we spoke, which was an enjoyable call on Sunday evening, it's indicative of a sort of historical, what I call heavyweight country that is in decline. And I think where it's gone wrong is that Parliament, which basically is supposed to be populated by 650 MPs who represent the people, they are supposed to be omnipotent, and they are supposed to effectively protect the interests of the British people and the British nation. But you have to lay the blame, I think, for what is happening at the door, arguably of Tony Blair largely, and his changes to our constitution, and his introduction of various acts and laws which undermined our constitution, which, as you know, had served us extremely well and delivered probably the highest trust society on earth, with the best functioning parliament, judiciary, civil service, where you had a vocational civil service that was basically required to deliver, and it was in its DNA to deliver. Obviously, a lot of the stuff emanated from empire, from the fact that we, as a small nation, were administering a very large percentage of the globe. But I think what's happening, and as you often see this throughout history, is great nations wax and wane, and I think we are slowly waning. And in answer to your question, I don't think we now have this functioning civil service. I think Tony Blair's changes to our constitution, the introduction of the Human Rights Act, the introduction of a Supreme Court, which basically is now a quango, and no longer reports to the Lord Chancellor, who basically was accountable for appointments in the past. Also, the Equality Act, which I think has damaged the relationship between people on the ground by basically turning it into a sort of legal fest and enriching idle parasitic lawyers at the expense of the rest of the population. So I think Tony Blair has a lot to blame, and I think he can see that himself. And recently, the old fox came out himself, trying to almost distance himself from his own reforms. So in answer to your question, I do think to have 7 prime ministers or 7 CEOs of a corporation, whatever it is, that is not a sign of a healthy country or economy. And I like continuity. In the businesses I run, I value continuity, I value loyalty, I value commitment to that company or that cause. And we certainly haven't got that. We've got the disintegration of the two-party system, which has let us down. Boris let us down in 2019 when he won an 80-seat majority and failed to deliver the reforms that are needed. And we've really gone from one disaster to another. And Parliament, as I say, has been undermined. So we need to get Parliament back. We need to, in my view, reverse devolution, which I thought was been a terrible plan, which I think was part of the attempt to break up the most proud sovereign nation in Europe by the EU, which, again, as you probably know, the foundations of the EU it's actually founded on a monopoly called the European Coal and Steel Community. So its genesis was a monopoly. And it was basically created by a bunch of largely Gramscian Marxists who I think realized they had to destroy the nation state if they were to create this European superpower that they've always intended to create. But in the vote in 2016, which you just alluded to, the British people threw a spanner in the works, and that has caused a lot of trouble. But suffice to say that despite the fact the British people are supposed to be the bosses, and they gave an instruction to the people who are serving them to deliver Brexit, it hasn't happened. And we haven't had the proper Brexit because Europe fears what would happen if Britain truly reformed itself, got rid of this welfare economy, and actually started to create wealth and to follow some form of Austrian school economic model, which deregulated and genuinely invested long-term, encouraged the private sector, not the state, all the things that are necessary to create wealth. But Europe is petrified of that, Patrick, because Europe is a sclerotic, dying, monopolistic sort of block of countries who, as I say, are founded on a sort of socialist principle rather than a capitalist principle.
Let me ask you, how much of it is they're avoiding touching or addressing issues that the people actually want because they're trying to, they're afraid of the minority few that are too loud? What are they afraid of? What are they afraid of doing?
Well, as I say, I think it's been a plan to arguably stop a further war in Europe, which hasn't been successful because we've had further wars in Europe since the genesis of the EU. Indeed, we have one now that's been going on for longer in Ukraine than the First and Second World War put together. If you take the incursion into the Donbass and Luhansk and Crimea in 2014. So look, I think they're totally misguided. I personally like the concept of competing nation states who have a proud history, who have an accountable parliament and an accountable government, and who put the interests of their people at the top of the agenda, which I have to applaud the people leading the US now. I think you've been through some dark times, and some of the malaise that we've imported from you. And I think when you see what happened with US aid and you see what had to be done when Joe Biden left office, you can understand how the tentacles of what I call wokery and DEI and all the sort of cancerous sort of malign philosophies that have permeated both you in parts and have taken massive hold here in our civil service, in our government, and in almost all of our big corporates. So you've seen the demise of the family business, and you've seen the rise of faceless shareholders through pension funds. And very often, a bit like in the US, I think the big corporations, the management team very often own a very small percentage of the business. So you know, it's much less accountable than a business that's owned by a family where people can go and talk to the people who own it and whose interests are entirely aligned with the workforce. So I think many things have gone wrong, and maybe again we should talk about central banks, and we can talk about quantitative easing and dishonest things like that, which I think have distorted the sort of Protestant ethic which used to run deep through the US and the UK. But that's a bigger subject to talk about. But in the short term, I lay the blame firmly at Tony Blair's door. And we've got to now, in my view, win an election before 29 and install a group of sensible people with experience who are going to instigate a plan to reverse a lot of this malign legislation and a lot of this damaging philosophy, which is, I think, part of the Anglo-Saxon world now.
So that's fair. I say we start off with this report, okay? And let's just start off there. So this report you release, the Rape King Inquiry, it's all over the place. It got 50 million plus views when you released it yourself just on your Twitter account, not accounting all the other people that shared it. Many different content creators reacted to it, nothing from BBC. And it highlights the devastating 250,000 kids that were violated in a most brutal. The more stories you read through this, it's just kind of very difficult to read it. You literally are in pain as you're going through this. So one, how long did it take to put this report together? And two, what has the reaction been from the public, specifically people in UK, to this report?
Well, let's go back to the start, Patrick. So the genesis of this report, it emanates originally from the fact that the government, the state, who has been, and particularly the Labour Party here, have been complicit in this because it is, as you can see, linked to the bloc Muslim vote, which effectively through the postal voting system here, which needs to be reformed, Labour were able to win large tracts of particularly the inner cities by attracting the Muslim vote. That Muslim vote is now migrating, and it's going more to vote for Muslim independence, and it's following a similar path to Lebanon, which used to be a Christian country. It's now a Muslim country. But look, the government refused to have a statutory inquiry, and by a statutory inquiry, I mean an inquiry where they can use the power of the law to force people to come to a statutory inquiry, and they can force them to give testimony. But as this goes to the root of the entire establishment, and as it's been going on for probably 30, possibly 40, possibly even 50 years, as you can see from our report, on an increasing scale, because if you don't deal with evil, it flourishes. And that's what the law is there for, to actually stop these evil happenings taking place. Now, we couldn't get the government to have this report. They tried to claim that the rape gangs were happening in small silos in places like Bradford and Oldham and Rochdale and Rotherham. But we know that not to be the case. And at the time, I was a Reform MP. I was sitting alongside Nigel Farage, who promised that if they didn't have a statutory inquiry, Reform would have their own inquiry. I was actually in the chamber. You can see a picture of me sitting next to him when he announced it. He then politically assassinated, or tried to politically assassinate me. He hasn't achieved that, and kicked me out of his party for whatever reason. You'll have to ask him the reasons for that. But I wasn't expecting it, and ostensibly they claimed I had threatened people in meetings, and I had bullied people in my office, and I had early onset dementia, and false witness statements were made. My firearms were taken away from me. My shotguns. I like to shoot in the UK, and you know I'm a law-abiding citizen. So they booted me out of the party, and once we dealt with all the issues that were palpably false, I set up a movement called Restore Britain, and we, with my team, decided that if Farage, having promised it and taken all of the sort of applause and plaudits from the media, he then failed to deliver it. So we thought, well, we will deliver it. So this has taken about 15 months, probably.
15 months to put together.
It's been done with a fantastic team, led by Sammy Woodhouse, who's actually a victim herself, and does have a child by her rapist. And she is an incredibly strong and very able woman. Marlon West, who's now standing for Restore Britain as the mayor of Manchester, now that Andy Burnham looks like he's going to be crowned as Prime Minister without having been through a general election. And none of us know what his policies are, but it looks like he's going to be installed as the next ghost-busting Labour Prime Minister, which I suspect will end in tears. So we decided to do it. So we had to basically do all the research, and we had to use Sammy's experience, and we had to have safeguarding experts, because when you undertake something like this, the psychosomatic effects of dragging up these evils from the past can have a profound mental effect on people. So we had to make sure we had all the safeguards there. We produced the witness bundles.
Would you mind going through? Would you mind going through? Assume the audience has no idea what's in this report. Assume the audience has no idea what the 250,000 is.
But by the way, Patrick, we think 250,000 is a very conservative figure.
I saw that number. Maybe walk us through, for somebody that's not read the report, what's in the report. What are the findings?
Well, because of Sammy Woodhouse's experience, and because of the experience of places up north where you'd had largely Islamic settlement in places like Bradford, in Leeds, in Rotherham, in Rochdale, all across largely in a lot of the northern cities. But this is happening across Britain in almost everywhere. But we thought we'd look at not only the victims, but we'd also try and analyze the reasons why this happened and how it happened and how it wasn't dealt with by the authorities. So we knew from Sammy that this had happened to her, it had happened to many other people, and that was what took some time. We went and found the victims who were fit enough and well enough to be able to give evidence. And I'm absolutely full of praise for them, because the 2-week hearing, I have to say, was probably two of the worst weeks of my life, having to listen to this testimony, not just from victims, as I say, but also from experts on Islam and from medical experts and from all the people we needed to hear from, other MPs who sit in the House with me from other parties. So it was a cross-party effort. But it wasn't a statutory inquiry, so we didn't have the ability to force people to attend. Everyone who attended voluntarily. So, and we didn't go into this with any preconceived idea of what we were going to find. But what we found is that there is a link between the Islamic settlement in parts of the UK and the fact that they don't integrate. They have very often their own Sharia law, which is allowed to happen, which I personally think is a disgrace. If you live in this country, you should live by our laws, and you should integrate into our society, and you should contribute to and accept the fact that we're a Christian country with a very long history and a very proud heritage, and come here because you want to contribute, not because you want to settle your own religion and your own creed and your own credo within another country. So I think what has happened is, and it's a very complex situation, but gradually over time, in a way, it was accelerated to some extent, I think, by the Stephen Lawrence case, which was a murder of a tragic murder of a young black man. And after that, I think we became fearful of being called racist as a nation. Now, that then morphed into, obviously, DEI and a lot of other sort of what I call malign philosophies, which have weakened the fabric of Britain. So we've got to look at the reasons how it happened. Now, it obviously, because it wasn't nipped in the bud, as we say in England, it grew. And it grew from, I think, if you read our report, the fact that culturally, we were a very high trust society, and over thousands of years, we'd come to respect and honor women, who are a big part of all of our culture. Whereas I think if you read, Islam has a very different view of women, and it treats them very differently. And I never quite understand why the Me Too movement is so vocal about young white men treating women badly, when it doesn't have anything to say about the way in which Islam treats its women, and the fact that they are forced to cover up. And if you read our report, you can see that culturally, it is like trying to mix oil and water. So I didn't write that report to make any judgments, or we didn't. It's a collective effort. It's not me. It's a collection of very concerned people and very brave people. And to your point earlier, yes, it does come with personal risk. I've had many death threats, and taking on an issue like this, which is probably linked to organized crime, it's certainly linked to rings of prostitution, and it's big business. So there's always money involved somewhere. So yes, it's high risk, but I think if Britain is to repair itself, and I don't know to what extent it's happening in the US, but if Britain is to repair itself, we have to confront this evil, and we have to deal with it, and we have to accept the fact it's been happening, and we have to have a frank, honest, Anglo-Saxon type debate about it. That is the strength of your constitution. It's the strength of our constitution.
I'd like to take a step back. Here's what I'd like to do. And for me, I agree. I think this needs to be a documentary. I think the world needs to see it. I think the world needs to meet each one of these individuals that are sharing their testimonies. But this is what I'd like to do, Rupert. Again, speak to the audience. Assume they've not read the whole thing. Share some stats. Share some testimonies. Share some stories, because it's so uncomfortable to even read it and listen to it, but I think the truth needs to be laid out. So if you don't mind sharing a couple of their testimonies of the 2 weeks that you listened to, which I'm sure was very difficult, walk the audience through with a couple different things. When you're saying 250,000, what percentage they were raped by who, what backgrounds did they have? I think it's good for the audience to grasp that directly coming from you.
Well, the majority of the perpetrators of the rape were of Muslim background, from predominantly Pakistan, and very often from one part of Pakistan called Mirpur. But there were other perpetrators from Eritrea, from Somalia, from Bangladesh, from Afghanistan. So look, I mean, it's predominantly an issue, we think, from doing our research, with Pakistani Muslim men. And by the way, it's not just girls who get raped, it's boys as well. So that we didn't cover massively in the report, but it's quite clear that was happening too. So, I mean, I did a speech in Westminster Hall about a month ago where I actually read some of the testimonies. So I'll read you a couple of I have to put my glasses on, being very old these days. So, I mean, give you an example. So I opened with, and I don't know whether your listeners are up to this, but I mean, if you're happy for me to read it, I'll read it to you.
Please go for it.
So this is one testimony, the first one, which I read. He said, he took his pants down, penetrated me, had sex with me, and then he stopped before ejaculation. He picked up the bottle of Jack Daniels, which was now empty, and he forced it up inside me. He broke the glass while he was there. At that point, I was about 12, nearly 13. So that's one. And then I'll read you two, which were particularly difficult to listen to. I mean, one of them, a girl who I've got to know, she witnessed this herself. She's very strong, and she's now rebuilt her life and actually done a degree. So she said she was actually trafficked, would you believe it, to Saudi Arabia, which was extraordinary. Again, this was happening. People were being taken out of the country into different parts of the world, which is extraordinary. And our government doesn't seem to be particularly bothered about that. So she said it was all of the white girls in every home that I went to. I remember a man opening the back of a van, and I saw maybe 15, 20 girls locked in dog cages.
Dog cages.
So literally dog cages in the back of a pickup or a van. And another one, this is the worst we had, I think, or one of the worst. They're all pretty shocking, to be frank with you. Dogs were brought in, and I couldn't move at all. I had nowhere to move. I think what was the scariest thing was not having any concept of it. There were men around me, not horrified, not disgusted, not helping, but filming and laughing, making bets on whether the dog could actually rape me or not. And yes, I was raped by a dog. The man just held my face, stared me down straight in the eyes, and he wanted to see me break, which I did. Now, honestly, Patrick, whoever does that sort of thing, in my mind, there's no place for them in a high trust society like ours. There just isn't. I mean, these go on. There's a lot of these, and I think if you've read the report, you've probably seen most of them.
It's disturbing when you're going through it, and how many of them got pregnant, and how many of them, one of the girls at 18 years old was 70 years old, and she said probably 100 men raped her, and these are kids that are 11, 12, 13 years old. They're going to a house that they can't leave, and then being threatened that if you go tell anybody, we'll tell your family, and we'll come and do the same thing to your younger sister. So the older sister, protecting the younger sister, doesn't want anything to happen to her. And in some cases, they were recording them and putting the videos online and publicly humiliating them. But the question that I think the audience needs to...
It was terrible, because what happened is there was like a roadmap to it, and some of that roadmap revoltingly centered around, establishment homes for girls who didn't have a proper sort of mother and father. So they were in the care of the establishment, if you like. So this was happening, as you could probably see, in these care homes where the most vulnerable girls were residing, with no parental structures around them, just an establishment structure. It was also happening, and this happened to Marlon West and his daughter, I think was called Scarlett from memory in the report. You've probably seen it. So they were groomed early. So they were groomed. It's linked to the taxi industry, which again, there's a lax licensing structure here in the UK, which allows these taxis to be licensed. And a lot of them were licensed out of somewhere called Wolverhampton in the Midlands. And these taxis, obviously, if you see a taxi hanging around outside a house, it's less suspicious than if you see a car hanging around outside the house. So a lot of the taxis were involved in this as well. So they were groomed as young as 10, 11, 12, 13. And they were basically, as you could see, going to pick these girls up from schools, pick them up from care homes, and abusing them. And they'd disappear for long periods of time. Were abused and then would return, obviously, with all sorts of illnesses and injuries, particularly sort of, chlamydia and gonorrhea and other sexually transmitted diseases. And obviously, from the statement I just read you, I mean, the injuries, one of those girls who had a bottle which broke up her, that the injuries would have been horrific. So the question is, why wasn't the National Health Service reporting and policing this? Why were the care homes not reporting and policing it? Why were the police apparently on occasions facilitating it? Why was local government not dealing with it? I mean, it's just, why were ministers allowing this to happen? Why were the civil service not intervening? I mean, the list of questions just goes on and on. To anyone with a modicum of intelligence, you can't believe this has been happening. So they were groomed with cigarettes, with sweets, with alcohol, obviously with drugs. It's linked to drugs. We have something called county lines drugs here in the UK, which is basically the peddling of drugs across the country, which is a huge problem for the police. And therefore, there's a link to drugs. And gradually, they went from being friendly to being groomed to being raped. And when you're 10, 11, 12, 13, and I was struck by one girl who said, and a lot of the social services said often these girls were asking for it. And she said, I was 12 years old and I got used to being raped. And I used to, when I knew it was going to happen, I used to prepare myself to be raped. Well, that the social services took as her being ready to be raped and accepting it. But the point is, she was 12 years old. She thought it was the norm, Patrick. And, if somebody's 12, they haven't grown up properly. They don't know which way is up. And if this violence happens to them at a sufficiently young age, it became clear to me that they accept it as the norm, which of course it isn't. And if you're brought up by loving, caring parents, which is the objective of marriage and a Christian faith, you understand that that is definitely not right. But if you don't have those kind of boundaries and those kind of benefits of a sound upbringing and a kind, loving upbringing, then it struck me it's quite easy to understand how the girls start to think it's normal. Well, it isn't normal. It should never be normal. And the perpetrators of this need to be punished. In my view, the people who facilitated it and allowed it to happen need to be punished. And we have got, we did this report. It was crowdfunded by 20,000 concerned citizens in the UK. We raised £600,000 and we've got that report done, had a 2-week hearing with a fantastic barrister, Graham Smith, who helped write the report, along with my team, who basically produced all the stats and everything else which have gone into it. So literally, you know, this is something which should be stimulating debate. And I'm incredibly grateful that you in America seem to care more about this than most of our institutions in the UK. I mean, I would defund the BBC tomorrow. It's a malign monopoly. They haven't reported on this at all, as you said.
That is just amazing to think that BBC, that was once recognized as one of the most reputable, you know, media franchises in the world, hasn't reported on this once. But by the way, I want to follow up on this with a couple of questions.
Patrick, you probably know that the BBC Charter means they're supposed to inform, educate, and entertain with complete impartiality. Well, how can something like this be produced and not be covered at all? I mean, it's quite extraordinary. They've actually found other ways of trying to go round it rather than talking about it. So it's not new. And I think, as you probably know, historically, monopolies go wrong in the end. Monopolies are a bad thing. And the BBC is certainly in that camp. So assuming somebody sensible gets power, the first thing we need to do is responsibly defund the BBC. And I'm sure Donald Trump would agree with that sentiment.
I think he would, and he would not just want to defund it. He would probably want to sue them. But in America, when the reason why Americans are interested in this story is because if this happens to you, America could be next, especially the fact that the previous president allowed 10, 15, 20 million illegal immigrants to just walk across the border. So who knows if some of this stuff has happened in America? A lot of Americans are like, this is probably happening here, and we don't even know most of this stuff that's taking place. The ideology travels; it can go anywhere. So, the question I got is:
you've got some pretty awful people running, you know, cities like Los Angeles and Chicago and you know other parts of the US. So I wouldn't be surprised if it isn't festering away. I mean, Minnesota, I think you've got the same similar issue. It may well be festering away in places like that, and people aren't aware of it. I wasn't aware of this. You know, as we said in the report, until we actually read some victim testimony, which came through. Because again, if you don't come across it normally, you wouldn't expect this sort of evil to be happening on your doorstep.
But this has been happening for decades. And the part I wanted to ask you is a testimony of Fiona. In Fiona's testimony on the bottom, it says, the call handler told her, you can't describe them as Asian men because that's racist. You should just be glad your child is being taught a different culture. On one occasion, a police officer returned Fiona to the house where the abuse was occurring and told the man to have fun with her. I mean, if you have a government or cops, their job is to protect the helpless, those who can't help themselves. If this is out there, because on one end, Keir Starmer the other day, he tweeted something about the previous incident that happened last week and saying this 36-year-old white Scottish man is being investigated by counterterrorism. Can you go back on the tweet where you had it? Counterterrorism police after 5 people were stabbed in Edinburgh. And he said after his arrest, I'm protecting the country from these effing Muslim bastards raping our young daughters. And Mehdi Hassan responded and said the same week that Rupert Lowe put out this bullshit rape gang report falsely claiming Muslims raped 250,000 white girls, and same week Elon Musk amplified it on here, this happens. Is anyone surprised? They're inciting violence against Muslims and emboldening extremists. And so...
Well, Patrick, I don't buy that, because what I I have nothing, and I sit in Parliament with a lot of the Muslim independents, and I get on fine with them. They're perfectly decent and intelligent people. But the point is, if this evil is happening, the job of the police and the job of the government is to treat everybody equally under the law and deal with it in the correct way and stop it. But that's what they haven't done, as you say, for fear of being called racist. And actually, they go further than that. So they lock people up. So when we had the Southport killings, which was the killing of 3 young girls, tragically, up in Southport, Lucy Connolly put out some social media posts and deleted them 4 hours later because she was so shocked by what had happened. And she ended up going to prison for 30 months. And then you get some of these people who perpetrate this kind of rape, and our judges over here, as I said to you, the system's gone badly wrong because of the Tony Blair's creation of the Supreme Court, which has become a quango, a woke quango. Some of these people are let off with lesser sentences because the judges say that they are culturally not understanding what they've done wrong. Well, I'm sorry, that doesn't work for me. If we all live in a country, we accept the fact that we live under one set of rules, one set of laws, and one set of policing, and everybody should be treated in the same way. But the government very gradually, as I say, it goes to the Muslim bloc vote, it goes to power, Patrick, it goes to being elected. And these votes historically have gone to Labour, and particularly, as I say, in the big inner city areas. So Labour rely on these votes. That's why I don't personally think Labour either will or should win another general election, because they have allowed this pervasive evil to grow and damage the structure of Britain. And I hope the British people will punish them from now on in the ballot box for not delivering as they should have done. And again, there's the new Ghostbuster Burnham, who is supposed to be unveiled as our new Prime Minister, unelected Prime Minister again. And the track record of unelected Prime Ministers is pretty poor if you look at your last 7 people who've been and gone. You know, he was involved in this rape gang issue in Manchester, which is a big sort of axis of it. And there is criticism of him from many people for not digging deep enough and actually getting to the cause of the problem and the heart of the problem. So he's not above criticism. And I'm afraid it runs deep through the British establishment. And it's a combination of power and this fear of being called a racist, which has become a fate in this country, which people fear worse than anything. Well, we have a mantra for that. We say we don't care. And the only way we can deal with this is to actually look at the facts. And if people call us racist, even though we're not, we just have to accept that. And we have to be tough. But a lot of people in Britain do not want to be called racist. I happen to think Britain is the least racist country on earth. And I've traveled very widely in many parts of the world, and I've found far more racism and far more sexism in other parts of the world than I do in Britain. Britain, on the whole, has very kind people, and I don't blame the people. The people in Britain are some of the best people on earth. What's happened is the people who lead the country have gone very badly wrong. And I think until we change that, they'll go on making bad decisions, and we'll go on suffering the consequences of that.
Yeah. So, and by the way, the 250,000, or the number that you're saying is higher than 250,000, who gave that number? Where did that number come from? Because one thing I know about UK is they don't track this data. So they don't track, and they put it as Asian, and people can't really qualify it. Where did you get that number from?
You're quite right. Well, it's an estimate from what we've seen and the inquiry we've done. But you're quite right. They call them Asian grooming gangs, and we point out on X. And I should say, we all owe Elon Musk a huge vote of thanks, Patrick, for buying Twitter and turning it into a free speech platform. And, you know, that has given a lot of protections to the British people, because otherwise, I suspect, as we're seeing, things would be suppressed. But the answer is they call them Asian grooming gangs. We point out that, you know, Japan is in Asia, and this is not a Japanese issue. It's not an issue from most parts of Asia, but it is an issue from certain parts of Asia. But to call them Asian grooming gangs is a misnomer. and it's wrong. But it shows you how devious these people are, and how they just don't want to address the truth. And our estimate is very conservative. It's probably many more than 250,000, but that is a figure that we think is on balance of what we've seen, a minimum. And also the places that we have put in our report that it's happening is also conservative, because every time we put a list, we get people from other parts of the country saying it's happening in my area. But unless we've got definitive proof of it, we haven't put it in the report. So look, I mean, it's very widespread, and I think it's, it does need to be discussed over here. It's been happening here, and people need to be punished.
Why targeting white girls? Why is it that specifically targeting white girls? Is it something that they believe in, that's in their scripture, in their Quran? Why are they mainly targeting white girls?
Well, if you read the report, where we do go into the reasons why we think it's happening, it's because white girls tend to not cover themselves. I think, it goes to Islam's view of other peoples and other religions, the infidel. If you read it, it's all in the report there.
You want me to read it to the audience? Because I have it right in front of me. I just was wanting to see if you want
to read it to them, Patrick. It's in there.
I'll read it to them. So it says, white girls show the curves of their bodies, so they are asking for it. They should be raped as punishment for not obeying Allah. Kafir, non-Muslims, girls are worthless. This is what it's saying in the report. Sex with a kafir girl doesn't count as adultery. Only sex with a Muslim woman counts as adultery. If you're not a virgin before marriage, you should be beaten. Many times I was told that the Quran says, if one of your wives disobeys you, beat her. And I can go on. This is disturbing to see this, to read this. The question becomes, what would happen, Rupert, if they committed the same crime in a Muslim-majority country? What would happen in Pakistan if they did this to another Muslim girl?
They would be executed, Patrick, if they did it to one of their own in Pakistan. Yeah.
So they would be executed in their own country. So they leave. So they rape other white girls in UK where they won't be executed. Will they even go to jail for doing this?
Well, a lot of them, of course, haven't gone to jail because, as you've seen, and to your point on the police, they were actually, one girl said she was regularly at police nights where the police officers got involved in raping girls. So look, this is a pervasive evil, and the answer to your question is, if the guardians of justice aren't doing their job, then it grows. And I think you've got to also look at their concept of, they're very clannish as a people, and they will defend their clan above everything else. So I think that's more important to them. And as you can see from the report, it's not wrong to lie if it's protecting your kind. I mean, we've gone into quite a lot of detail on what we consider to be the root causes, and we were hoping to stimulate debate, but nobody seems to want to have the debate over here. So it's fantastic that you're all taking interest in the US, and hopefully with some pressure from all of you, we can force the debate over here too.
Rupert, let me ask you, if there was 3 names of people you would want to debate on this topic that fully disagree with you, who would those 3 names be? If we can moderate it and host it.
Well, I think the person, the expert we had, Ayan Hirsi Ali, is a fantastic lady. She appeared at the hearing. She explained a lot of the reasons why it's happening. I don't really have 3 people who I would want to debate. There's a chap in America who's very close to Nigel Farage, who attacks us all the time. Is he called Hassan or something?
Mehdi Hassan? Not Mehdi Hassan. No, you're thinking someone else.
There's somebody who attacks us on a regular basis. But look, I mean, I just like to have a frank debate with anybody who will listen. And I was supposed to be speaking in Parliament about another issue today, which
Hassan Piker, the young
involves puberty blockers for young children. And again, this is all part of this malign ideology here, which is just wrong, Patrick. And we had this Tavistock Centre, which was doing all these experiments on young people who, very often sort of, people don't know about their sexuality until they have had a chance to sort of grow up properly. And the puberty blocker debate is on. It happened to just fall while we were doing this podcast. So having agreed to do it, I've done the podcast. But this is the sort of thing that's happening over in the UK now.
Let me ask a complete different question. So if 250,000 girls have been raped by these grooming gangs, how many stories do you have of fathers of these girls who found out that this was happening, that sought vengeance on the enemy that conducted the rape? How many testimonies of that do we have?
It's a very prescient question, because this was happening to the Sikh community. Their girls were being raped. And the Sikh men actually did stand up and took control, and they defended their young girls. But when people like Marlon West tried to do this here in the UK as a tax-paying, very upstanding member of his local community, the police made it very difficult for him to protect his daughter. And that is a common theme. So again, the police tended to side, I guess, for fear of being called racist, with the people who were perpetrating the evil rather than the people who were trying to stop the evil. And again, this is something we want to get to the bottom of. And you know, we have said, and it's in the report, which you've read, you will have seen, that we intend now we have a system here whereby we can bring private prosecutions. So if the state won't prosecute something that's wrong, a private citizen can bring the evidence together, put the case, and actually bring a private prosecution. And it's our intention to pick the worst culprits, both in terms of the perpetrators, but more importantly, you know, the NHS, as I say, the social services, local government, the police, you know, everyone who's failed in their duty, because in many ways, I think they've got more blood on their hands than anybody else. And let me
read this, because I think this is very important. I found a page where it says, this then escalated to coercion. The men began to showering the girls with attention, gifts, alcohol, and drugs. Then this escalated to coercion, gang rape, and trafficking. They transported victims across towns, shared with friends and family, and sometimes forced conversions to Islam, followed by religious marriages. The Muslim men justified the abuse by describing white girls as easy, trash, or morally inferior. The same networks targeted Sikh girls until Sikh communities mobilized collectively male protection and forced the gangs to withdraw. British girls were not permitted such a defense. This religiously framed exploitation was repeated in every major town and city and beyond. So one of the things I notice when I read through the stories, I see a pattern. I see the girls that were raped numerous times over and over again didn't have a father in their lives. Typically the mother, sometimes even the mother even knew about it. In one instance, the mother walks into the shower, the 11, 12-year-old daughter is being raped, and she walks out. She walks out because she's afraid of what's going to happen. And so this is why when I think about a story of 250,000 plus kids being raped and the father finds out, this in the Armenian community, I'm Armenian and Assyrian, and I lived in LA. If something like this happened to the Armenian and the Assyrian community, it would be chaotic. It would be a war full on. So if the number is 250,000, I asked this question from you on Sunday, and I'm curious to know how you answered this. A father connects me from UK. He says, Patrick, I know what's going on in UK. It's disturbing. We hear about friends and family that are going through this. If the government's not willing to do anything about it, 7 prime ministers last 10 years, do you think it's the Christian thing to do for us as men ourselves to defend our young girls? I didn't have an answer for him. What do you tell somebody like that?
Well, if the rule of law is working properly, Patrick, you want people to obey the law and abide by the law and respect the rule of law. But the question, I guess, is how long do you put up with a deficient legal system, a deficient police response, and an evil which is damaging the interests of your young people? I mean, sooner or later, people do have to act. But you've probably seen, as we were talking earlier, that the state clamps down very much on any form of dissent from the indigenous population far more aggressively than they do other people, because they know that once that gets out of control, then we end up with a very serious problem. And the issue we've got is that we have these illegal migrants arriving. They're called asylum seekers. I call them economic migrants. They're definitely not asylum seekers. They arrive, and because of the I mentioned to you earlier, the Human Rights Act, which embeds within it the ECHR, the European Convention on Human Rights. These people come in, mainly young men, predominantly Muslim, and they're being settled across the country. We end up, the taxpayer ends up providing them with water, with clothing, with spending money, with hotels, with just about everything that we're not providing to our own tax-paying veterans and citizens who need help. So the whole thing is wrong, and it is potentially reaching boiling point. And to your point, in the end, it will, if it's not dealt with, it will explode, because you cannot have a society which doesn't protect its most vulnerable
Oh, no,
people.
you can't do that, because if people have to take the job of a father is to protect his kids. And if you don't, for the rest of your life, you will feel like you're a coward for not defending them. I don't care if anybody doesn't want to defend my kids. A father will go to prison just to protect his kids. Of course, you want to be able to avoid it as much as possible, meaning if it's something small, somebody made a comment, somebody made this, there's levels to offense, right? Even if somebody says, something very dumb about your family, you probably don't want to fight them. An 18-year-old kid would. 35-year-old, it's better you stay by the kids and go to prison. But if you're crossing the line and raping, all the laws are outside the, especially if the jurisdiction and the law is not protecting, what is that father supposed to do?
But the problem you see is if you've got these illegal migrants arriving, there's a lot of people living here illegally. And again, we've done a document, it's actually up on the shelf behind me, on mass deportations. And people accuse us of wanting to deport whole communities of people here with a British passport. That's not true. We'd start with the illegals arriving illegally. We then deal with the people living here illegally, and then we deal with the foreign criminals in our prisons. And then we would turn our attention, a bit like Sweden and Denmark now are. They indulged in some very ill-advised immigration in about 2015 when Angela Merkel was in charge of Europe. And it's literally, Sweden was a very high trust society, as was Denmark. And they brought these people, again, largely from Muslim cultures, and they've reduced places like Malmo to the crime center of Europe. And now both Sweden and Denmark are turning their attention to legally encouraging people to go. So you can create a hostile environment. So you deal with benefits and encouraging people to come in order to collect money for doing nothing. They also need to integrate, as I've said, they need to play a part. And I have no problem with people who do that. But if people don't, then we have to find a solution to sorting this out, because if we don't, it's just going to get worse and worse. I don't see our state doing enough to protect the interests of the honest, decent, tax-paying people who do care hugely about the country and are very law-abiding. But when the straw, that breaks the camel's back breaks, then there is going to be a problem. And I think while the Islamic population, I think formally is around 6% of our population, I think you're less than that. I think, aren't you 2%, something like that?
Mm-hmm.
But I think we're about 6, probably a bit more than that if you take the people who are here illegally. But we cannot afford to see that go higher and higher and allow parallel courts, Sharia courts, allow cousin marriage, allow, halal slaughter, which is happening more and more here and not being labeled properly. It's basically a takeover, and I, in the end, we have to sooner or later stand up for what we are and what history has made us. And if we don't, then we will lose everything that we've gained over thousands of years, and arguably deservedly so.
Are you from the school of thought where this is being protected all the way from the top? and I'm talking from the king standpoint, because, you've heard some stories about him taking money from Qatar and, his relationship with Muslims in the past and Islam, and, how he'll be very complimentary to Muslims, but not as often complimentary to Christians. Do you think this is something that comes all the way from the top?
Well, what we haven't, I mean, again, the king, as you know, constitutionally doesn't have anything other than a sort of, he's the titular head of our constitution. So he's, after the Civil War, he ceased to be, if you remember, the Civil War was basically about the divine right of kings. So he sits at the top. Constitutionally, he's very important, Patrick, because he also technically is under our constitution supposed to be defender of the faith. That is his role, and that faith is the Church of England. Now, I did a lot of work for the Prince's Trust, and I have met King Charles on a few occasions. I don't know what he is or isn't doing to influence this situation. If he was a good man, he would be reading this report and he would be influencing it in the right way. And I think he should be, in my opinion, underlining the fact that he is defender of the faith, whereas he, I think, I'm right in saying, prefers to be described as defender of faiths. Well, you can't be defender of the faith and also be defender of faiths. You have to be defender of the faith if you are head of the Church of England, which is what he is.
Well, the only reason I asked that is because in 1996, I'm sure you've read it, the Grand Mufti of Cyprus, Nazim al-Haqqani, claimed Prince Charles had secretly converted to Islam in Turkey. And we've read this before. So to me, if that were to happen, then one could speculate and say, okay, fair, maybe that's his religious belief and he's converted, and to each his own, but maybe that's why he's slightly more protective. Now, of course, that's speculation, but when you read articles like this, you wonder if the influence is coming all the way from the top.
Well, he certainly, he has Muslim worship at Windsor and things. I mean, he's certainly very keen to propagate a multicultural society, which, again, I have no problem with if people integrate and they accept the prevailing laws and culture of the people they come and live amongst. And if you or I visit or go and live in an Arab or a Muslim country, I would expect to integrate and pursue their culture and their practices, which, again, I've often been to Dubai and Abu Dhabi and other parts of the Gulf, and at the end of the day, if I'm there, and we're in Eid or we're in Ramadan, I try and ensure that I'm respectful of the way they live their lives. But it doesn't appear from this report that necessarily is reciprocated when you read it. Well, and I can't comment really on King Charles because I don't know well enough, but I do think his role is defender of the faith, and I think that says it all in my view.
Yeah, it's kind of weird when in 2025 you deliver an Easter message and 2026 you say you don't. One can only speculate why you protect as much as you do. It's a little strange. A country that used to be the financial capital of the world. US and UK are tied historically for the rest of our lives, whether anybody likes it or not. So maybe. And
so we should be. So we should be.
We should be. I agree.
We are, and particularly you are, and you've got this proud history of since the founding fathers, and I have the greatest respect and admiration for those great men who wrote the U.S. Constitution. You have the greatest respect for individual freedom, and if you read our report, I don't think necessarily that individual freedom is something at the top of the Islamic agenda, and that I think is something people should be concerned about, because I want to live in a country of individuals. I don't want to live in a collectivist country. And I've looked at enough history to know that collectivism doesn't work. It crushes individualism, and it's individuals who create the best outcomes for a society. And we've seen that in the US, we've seen it in the UK. Many of the best things in the world come from the UK and the US, and it comes from the fact we're free people. And you know, if you look at the battle we had when I was young against the USSR, that collapsed. That was sort of collectivism versus individualism. And I think we need to, both of us, pull each other up by the boots and remember what we are and who we are, and propagate individualism and fight collectivism. I really think never in history has there been a time when we need to do that more.
I agree. We're on the same page there. By the way, just out of curiosity, is the data that clear enough where you can see Muslims from some parts of country that come in as migrants who have a very, very low rape percentage versus this one city that they come from, Pakistan? Does the data reflect that? Because all you have to do is look at the cases, take the amount of immigrants that have come from that country and say, in this category, it's only 0.02%. In this category, it's 0.4%. Here, it's 1.3%. Guess what? Moving forward, we don't want any migrants coming from Pakistan because of XYZ. Do we have that detail?
I mean, we haven't actually, I don't think we've studied the full analysis on it, but it's much less in Pakistan, where you have the death penalty for perpetrating rape, than it is here, where people are apparently going unpunished. So, you know, it's just going to be a fact of life, isn't it? You don't necessarily need to do the maths on that. But you know,
but it would at least expose, because what would be fair, like, let's just say if somebody's I'm a Christian, but let's just say a Muslim watches this and they say,
I'm full of admiration. Now I know you're partly Armenian. I mean, the Armenians are some of the most able people in the world.
My mother's Armenian, my dad's Assyrian, and I speak Aramaic, and I speak Armenian and Farsi and English and a little bit of German. But as a Christian myself, let's just say somebody watches this, they're a Muslim, and they say, you know what, Rupert, this is unfair. Patrick, all you guys are doing is you're attacking my religion, and I have nothing to do with these rape gangs that are from Pakistan. Great. I'd love to be able to say, anybody that comes from here, these are the worst cases. If we get people that come here,
it's a very good point, Patrick. If I could just come in there, because this is an issue for me. And again, I am not, and nor have we said in this report that everybody who's Muslim is bad. That is certainly not the case. But what I do think is that when these sort of evils happen, what I call sensible Muslims who want to integrate and want to contribute and want to play a part in our more libertarian and individualistic society, what they fail to do is criticize radical Islam when radical Islam perpetrates things on non-Muslims which are wrong. And you know, they are, in a way, I think, partly frightened of radical Islam. And I personally don't think Britain has been tough enough on radical Islam. We allow various radical Islamic bodies to operate here. And to some extent, I think they are partly responsible for what's happening. So look, I mean, the imams in the mosques, we heard some of them are quite radical themselves. Some of them are radicalizing people who otherwise wouldn't be radical. I mean, we heard testimony again on this. It's all part of the sort of overall structure of the report. So if I were to say, are all Muslims bad? No, they're not. There are some extremely good Muslim people, and I wouldn't for 1 minute say otherwise. But we've just tried to analyze this particular problem, and we have concluded and we've put forward not only what's been happening, but we've tried to reason and explain why it's been happening, how it's been happening, and stimulate debate in the hope that it will be stopped, because it's still happening today, Patrick. It hasn't changed. We know it's happening today. It's very slightly changed in form, but in substance, it's still happening. So, you know, while we're having this podcast, there are probably girls being raped, abused, and groomed. And you know, that the thought of that is frankly horrific.
Yeah, there's no question about that. By the way, do you have any aspirations of being a prime minister one day? Is that something that you think about? I know it's not like U.S. where you run. It's a very different model. But do you have any aspirations and interest in that job?
Well, I went into politics late. I actually did stand. I've always been interested in it, and I fought against the Maastricht Treaty, which was the first sort of major surrender of our sovereignty, or one of the first. And the 72 European Communities Act was the first, which was the biggest, one of the big surrenders. But then you had the Maastricht Treaty, obviously the Single European Act, Maastricht Treaty. And I stood as an MP in my own Cotswold constituency where I live in 97, kept my deposit, fighting to save the pound with Sir James Goldsmith, who never gets enough credit for what he did. Because if we'd lost the pound and we'd become part of the euro, none of what we're doing now would be happening, because once you lose your currency, you lose your sovereignty. Anyway, we saved the pound, and David Cameron's referendum actually happened because all three parties made a promise to have a referendum before they signed up for the euro. So I've been involved in politics peripherally, but I've been in the city 20 years. I ran a Premier League football club for 10 years, built a football stadium. I've done lots of other things in my life. I've lived in Japan. I've lived in Brazil. I've seen lots of different parts of the world and lots of different cultures. But I got elected as an MP when I was 67 years old. And I think, I've got probably more experience than most of my fellow MPs in Parliament, both from traveling a lot and also from running multiple businesses involved in, obviously, finance. And you mentioned the City of London. The City of London is a tragic story. When I was young, it was the most vibrant place in the world, obviously, with the US doing lots of financings in the Eurobond market and other sort of financings of nascent young companies and everything else, and flotations. But it's basically been regulated out of existence to the extent that London is no longer, it's a shadow of its former self. And I laughed when Rachel Reeves, the deficient chancellor of our exchequer, was talking about regulating for growth. Well, I had to point out in the chamber that you deregulate for growth, you don't regulate for growth. But these people are just, honestly, they've got no idea. So look, I've always been involved in politics. To your point, did I come into this to become Prime Minister? No, I came in to actually help Nigel Farage to achieve that. But for some reason, he decided I was not the right person to be alongside him. You'll have to ask him why that was. But I do think that if we haven't won an election and installed a group of sensible people under some strong leadership by 29, I think we are heading for a massive catastrophe in Britain. I sit on the Public Accounts Committee. I see public servants now, there are far too many of them. They're paid too much. Their pensions are too big. They're not held accountable by a front bench that doesn't understand what it's doing. And it is just depressing to watch the taxpayers' money leak out of the door. Whether it's incompetence or whether it's fraud is a matter for debate. But the bottom line is that taxes keep going up, private businesses keep declining and diminishing, and central planning is flourishing. And that is not a recipe for for a healthy or sound or prosperous economy, Patrick. So I think, in answer to your question, whether it's me or whether it's somebody else, we have to find a solution within the relatively short foreseeable future, and we have to basically implement radical change. Now, that with it will mean arguably a step backwards in order to move forwards, because you can't basically expect, after the period of money printing, of quantitative easing, of self-delusion that we've been through really in this extraordinary post-war period, you can't expect that things are going to carry on necessarily with an increasing standard of living. But a bit like the British people voted for Brexit, not because they wanted to be richer, but they wanted to be freer. They wanted their own accountable nation state. So people don't always vote for money. Sometimes they vote for principle. And I think the time now is coming where the British people have got to decide, do we continue to delude ourselves and live in this welfarist society, which basically pays out 334 billion in welfare and collects 331 billion in tax, while our national debt breaches 100% of GDP.
It's crazy.
Or do we actually say we're going to put on the hair shirt? We are going to collapse the size of the state, empower the individual, and actually go back to doing what we do best, which is investing long term in businesses that make sense, not businesses that are centrally planned and doomed to failure. So, in a nutshell, that's where we are.
Well,
I think
that's interesting. I mean, the idea for somebody to do the job, you need somebody that's fearless, that's tough, that's not afraid of going up against these guys, that's formidable. And for you to do what you did with your club in the past, business experience, you've been under the limelight for quite some time, so it's not like you're not accustomed to it, and you're a business guy. I thought it'd make for an interesting story. By the way, Starmer, Keir Starmer, who just resigned, when you and I were talking about it, you brought up the Fabian Society, and we talked about George Bernard Shaw. For some of the people that don't know about the Fabian Society, would you mind sharing that with the audience?
Yeah, if you actually look, the Fabian Society, a lot of people don't know about it, but it's something which goes again to the root of the Labour Party. And if you look at the front bench, most of them are Fabians. Keir Starmer is a Fabian, and he's a member of something called the Haldane Society, which is a very Marxist wing of British lawyers. I think, he's a Pabloist. I don't know if you've heard of Pabloism, but people should look at Pabloism as well. So he's, as I've said, Keir Starmer isn't what he appeared to be. He was he went to the Fabian Society's emblem, Patrick, which is a wolf in sheep's clothing.
I looked at that logo. Is that really their logo?
That was their logo, wolf in sheep's clothing. I mean, you couldn't, as I said to you, they were eugenicists. They were, pretty extraordinary people. And again, I think if you're a libertarian and you're a free thinker, it would be the antithesis of everything you believe in. So look, I mean, most of the Labour front bench are Fabians. Donald Trump's favorite man, who is gradually destroying London, or quite quickly destroying London, Sadiq Khan, he's a Fabian. It's a sort of a theme that runs through most of the left wing in the UK, and I guess they have their reasons for being part of it. But I've always had a healthy suspicion of anything like that, and I've never participated in that sort of thing myself. But look, yeah, it's not good. It's not good. And
wasn't Keir Starmer? I mean, you're looking at Tony Blair, Gordon Brown, Clement Attlee, Harold Wilson, James Gallagher, quite a few names. But wasn't Keir Starmer, before he became prime minister, one of his jobs, wasn't it child care services? Didn't that fall under his responsibilities?
I did watch a bit of your clip last night. He was the Crown Prosecution Service.
Crown Prosecution Service.
He was head of the Crown Prosecution Service, which again, you weren't a million miles off. As head of the Crown Prosecution Service, he and Lord Hermer, who is now next to him, or will be hopefully not for very long, as the Lord Chancellor, ultimately they were responsible for making sure that things like the rape gang scandal didn't happen, because the Crown Prosecution Service is supposed to oversee justice in the UK. So a lot of these files would have gone over Keir Starmer's desk during his time as head of the CPS. But look, Keir Starmer's a human rights lawyer, Patrick. He makes money out of human rights law. So, he's a bit like a poacher turned gamekeeper, really, when he's prime minister. And we see these people who peddle rubbish, enriching themselves and giving themselves a position in society which they don't deserve, rather like parasites feeding on the back of an elephant. But in the end, they kill the host animal. And I think we're very close to that in the UK now. I think we've got too many white collar parasites and not enough blue collar workers. I'm with the blue collar workers who actually get up in the morning and do something. I'm not with the white collar brigade who hopefully AI will destroy, who get between the wall and the wallpaper. So look, I think that's where we are. But
last question to ask you here. In the States, we have a Republican gubernatorial candidate in the state of California, Steve Hilton, who used to be a strategic advisor to David Cameron. Did you ever interact with Steve Hilton himself?
I've not spoken to him, but I think he had some quite sound views on life. I haven't really followed his career, but I was aware that he was running.
Yeah, he's running for governor in California, and I think he is the guy on the Republican ticket. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. Final thoughts on World Cup before we finish up. You're a soccer guy, so you know everything that's going on. How do you feel about England's chances in World Cup?
Well, England often flatter to deceive, Patrick. I obviously would like to see them win. When I was young, and I was born in 1957, England won the World Cup in 1966. As a result of that, I supported West Ham before I became chairman of Southampton. And there were the great players like, Jeff Hurst and Bobby Moore and Martin Peters, who played in that in that wonderful game. So I'm hoping under German leadership we will enjoy a route to the final. There's a game tonight which is quite important. If we win that, then I think that should put us through to the next stage. So look, I set up a football academy. Football in the UK again has we've got the best raw material. The young British players are incredibly brave and incredibly strong. But again, the industry is quite corrupt. There's a lot of agents who put making money ahead of creating great football teams. And there's a lot wrong with the structure of British football. I was on the board of the FA. I was on various of the boards of Wembley National Stadium. I helped build that. So, I think the industry needs change, but to see England win again would be fantastic. And I hope that they do it. But often sport, as you probably know, is won mentally rather than necessarily physically. And I hope that they prove to be strong enough mentally to go all the way this time.
But by the way, in your opinion, who's the greatest British soccer player of all time? It's a tough question because you guys have had quite a few.
Well, of course, Glenn Hoddle worked for me. He was a very talented, worked with me, a very talented football player. I think probably in his time, a natural football player, Bobby Moore, was incredibly able. Probably one of the best defenders ever.
Bobby Moore's the one that Pele called him one of the greatest defenders ever. I think Pele complimented him on his.
He sort of read the game, Patrick. He read the game. He was brilliant.
He was a captain of the 1966 team, I think.
He was. Yeah. He was. Yeah. Tragically, he died of cancer far too young. Wow. But he was a great player. I mean, I worked with a lot of those guys. I worked with Terry Cooper, who played at left back. He was my scout in Europe. I was a reasonably able hockey player in my time, although I did play football. The media say I was a hockey playing chairman, but I actually did play football as well at school. But look, the best day of my life was getting to the cup final in 2003, where we played Arsenal at the Millennium Stadium. We actually lost 1-0, but you'd think from the response of our supporters, we'd won the cup. But it was a great day out, and I'll never forget it. It was probably one of the best days of my life.
Unbelievable. By the way, have you seen Ted Lasso yet or not yet, the show?
I have. I've watched Ted Lasso. Would you believe it? While I was having my teeth, I had an abscess under one of my teeth, and the root, they couldn't find there happened to be a fourth root in one of my teeth. God knows why I've got fangs with four roots on. I'm not sure. But anyway, they found it in the end, but it took them many hours of drilling, and I was watching Ted Lasso while I was being under the drill. But it was a very entertaining program, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was very. Anyways, Rupert, thank you for your time. Really enjoyed talking to you. I look forward to the next time you're in the States. Hopefully, we'll be able to break bread.
Well, I'm coming to the States fairly soon. If you come to London, let me know, and I would be delighted to take you out to my club for dinner and look after you. That would be great. So let me know when you're here.
I will be coming. I look forward to it. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Patrick.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Okay.